thank you very much. First, of course, to the organizers for having me here. I'm very happy. Thank you all. This is a presentation where I will start with first highlighting where countries stand in the process of aging, in terms of both the current level and the pace, very quickly. Which will allow me actually to highlight the specific position of Ireland in that context. I will then present some pension summary indicators. The presentation will then take you through the nexus of legislated increases in retirement ages, projected life expectancy gains, and also the impact of shifting age boundaries in the measure of the so-called dependency ratios, which will then, of course, lead us to talk about the impact on pension spending and the relation with pension benefit levels. Then it will become clear, I think, that pension policies can cushion the impact of aging only to some extent, and that a crucial part of the solution lies within other policies that impact labor markets more generally, and including education, health in Ireland in particular. So I will. I changed the order. Sorry. So I'll start with that one. So just to flag that, so this is the so-called demographic old age dependency ratio, so number 65 plus over 2064. And here we look at basically the bar is the 2015, say currently, and we project until 2050, 35 years. And that's compared the white line. We compare also to the last 35 years, so same length period. And in the OECD, basically, there is an increase from 20 to 28, so over the last 35 years, so 40%. And it will basically double. It will increase by 90% over the next 35 years in the OECD on average. Ireland is specific because that's on that indicator, the aging has not started in Ireland. You see that this old age dependency ratio is at the same level now than it was 30 years ago. Actually, when I looked at a bit more, when you look at the old age dependence ratio in 1950 in Ireland, it was in 1950 at the level of OECD countries in 1990, so 40 years ahead. It didn't move since then, basically, and now aging will go through a very fast pace in Ireland because that ratio will be multiplied by 2.2, 1.9 in the OECD, 2.2 in Ireland. So from that standpoint, aging will be much faster in Ireland. Quick scoreboard. I chose colors not related to the flag, but to traffic lights colors. First you have relative income of the 65 plus compared to the relative income of the total population. So currently Ireland is at basically close to the OECD average, which is the second column, 89, 90%. You have the range among OECD countries. We have to be careful with this measure, especially in Ireland, because so the denominator is the disposable income of the total population, and of course with the big cycle, especially recently, the denominator has a big effect. I'll come back to this. Then you have relative old age poverty rates, so the share of people here 65 plus, which has an income below 50% of the median. So here again on that indicator, Ireland is doing well. So average income, but much lower relative poverty rate. This is in part closely related to the level of the old age safety net, which is currently at 32% of the average wage in Ireland. one factor, of course, in Ireland, I will not enter in the details of the current policy debates in the country, but one of the features of Ireland is that this old age safety net level, 32%, is very close to the full contribution-based basic pension. So there is not a lot of margin between the two, but of course that means that the safety net level for older people compared to the average wage is much higher than in the OECD on average, and that contributes a lot, of course, to lowering the relative poverty rates. Now, on the red coloring is the fact that the current average old age benefit ratio is, and that's measured by through the European Commission, 29% is among the lowest in the OECD country compared to 45% in Europe. But when we project over the next basically half a century almost, whatever that, how confident we can have on those projections, but you still have something about around 28%, which is low, but the relative position in a way is improving, because you see that in Europe there will be quite a fall in this related old age benefit ratio. And what we measure at the OECD to really isolate the impact of pension is we take a baseline case, the same for all countries, in that case that's full career, average wage worker, and we measure the replacement rate. So, and as you know, for Ireland, this is basically only, that's mandatory pensions, that's only the basic pension that is accounted for, which is a flat rate. And and this gives a replacement rate for average wage worker of 42%, much lower than the OECD, on average in the OECD country. That's for average wage worker. But because it is a flat rate, because it is a flat, sorry, I changed the order. So, because it's a flat rate pension, so 42% is what you see here for Ireland, for the average wage worker. But if you look at if you look at people with low earnings, so here that's half average wage worker. Of course, that's a flat rate. So in terms of replacement rate, this gives something much higher. And in fact, for low earners, it's close to the OECD average, right? So you have a big, steep feature, a steep curve of replacement rate relative to earnings, because of course the pension benefit is not mandatory, is not earnings related in Ireland. Of course, there is voluntary pensions, which quite plays a relatively big role in Ireland, but still, in terms of total spending today, voluntary pension account for 15%, of total spending in Ireland. So, yes, it plays an important role, but that's only 15%, at least in terms of spending. I'll come to this now, to the retirement age. So, in terms of retirement age, and that's only taking into account measures that have been legislated in OECD countries, at least legislated in 1 year ago, basically. So you have an increase of almost two years on average in the OECD, a bit more than 1.5 years. And you see that Ireland is way ahead of schedule, because we have 66 today, increasing to 68 by 2028. And that's based, I think the reform was through the crisis, right, in 2010-11 in Ireland, this increase. So anyway, the current retirement age is above the OECD average by far, and will still be much higher, 1.5, 2 years higher than the OECD average. I know there is this question today which I don't think is urgent, but it's a valid and good question whether there should be a link after 2028 with life expectancy in Ireland. We have countries in the OECD, we have 6 countries that have linked retirement age to life expectancy. That's Denmark, Finland, Italy, Netherlands, Portugal, and Slovak Republic. But they have legislated this increase. In many of those 6 countries, there is debate whether this will really be duly implemented, because this is a popular measure. People look at 2070, what it gives, and say, oh, really, we have retirement age at 74, in Denmark, 71, Italy, and people are scared, but of course 74, 71 in 2070 is not the same thing as 74, 71 now, and people don't get that really. But anyway, so this link to life expectancy is of course crucial, but legislation is one thing, and then the future will tell whether this will be duly implemented. Other countries have, by the way, introduced links, automatic links to demographic, but not through the retirement age. It impacts directly pension benefits. We discussed Spain this morning, but this is also the case in Finland, in Portugal, and of course all the countries with defined contribution, or even NDC countries, no short defined contribution countries, like Sweden, Italy, Poland, and so forth. So I move now to, here we have only the OECD average. This is the changes in remaining life expectancy from age 65. And you see that based on projections, that's here we're using UN projections to have most OECD countries. And you see that there is basically an increase of 1 year every 10 years. 1 year of increase in life expectancy after age 65. So in 2050, there will be a gain of about 3.5 years. And if we compare to the 35 years before, that's a bit of a slowdown, a little slowdown, because over the last 35 years, the increase was 4.5 years. Right? So it's slowing down a bit, but the trend is still from, again, we discussed this uncertainty around the projections, but this morning, so we have 35 years on average. Now this is this increase, the legislated increase in retirement age. So there is roughly 1.5 years. So 1.5 years legislated today for 2050. So that's roughly 40%. So 40%, we know that, of course, it does not stabilize the share of the working life compared to the share of the retirement period, right? Which is a good indicator. So to stabilize, you would need to see something like 2/3, right? That's the order of magnitude. So 40% is all legislated, but of course, we still have 35 years to go until 2050. But the really striking thing we found is we tried to measure how much you need to shift the age boundary to stabilize this old age dependency ratio. So here that's purely demographics. We take 65 plus over 2064, right? And we started with, so today, you saw in the previous chart, we start in the OECD with 0.28, this old age dependency ratio today. So the question is how much you need to shift the age boundary to stay at 28. In other words, if the answer is 1 year, you take the 66 plus divided by 2066 in 2050, and you compare to this old age dependency rate. So that will be 1 year if you get that. I don't know, I don't want to raise a quiz here of what you think should be this age shift, but I'll show you now, and that's more than 8 years on average in the OECD. That means that, to be clear, right, so if we have 8.5 years, you will need to measure the 73.5 plus divided by 2073 in 2050 to get the same old age dependency ratio now. That's very impressive, we think. Of course, not a caution, but something that helps a little bit, that there will be, if we go into this dependency, between quotes, concept, total dependency takes into account children, and the good news, so to speak, is that there will be less children. And to stabilize total dependency ratio, I'm joking, of course, on all these things, to stabilize total dependency ratio, the shift is only 6 years instead of 8.5, right? Now, the thing about this is that if you look, so if I go back here, if I look at, I don't have the chart here, but at the 35 years before, as I said, life expectancy gains were just a bit for about 4 years. But this shift in the age boundary to stabilize the old age dependency ratio at the level of 1980, so between 1980 and 2015, was only 3.5 years, right? So it was below the increase in life expectancy. So this gives you an idea of how fast we are going now. It's a different thing, right? And so this is the average in the OECD, and this average comes from, we make that for all countries, and you have this for a selection of countries. So again, if you focus on the OECD, you see the three numbers I mentioned, right? The bar is 8.5 years, something like that. The red is the increase in life expectancy, 3.4, and the black triangle is the increase in the retirement age, which was around 1.5 years. And you see what happens for Ireland, right? So it's for Ireland, I think I have the numbers here. Instead of 8.4 years, you need 9.5 years, a bit more. And the increase in life expectancy at 65 is about the same, a bit more, 3.7 years, and legislated is almost 2 years already. So from that standpoint, Ireland is now aging again. That's another way to express the thing that it's aging fast. So now, I think, yes, sorry, do I do this? Yes. I measured, so here this is the public expenditures projection. So, as a percentage of GDP. So here again we have to be careful with Ireland because the denominator is GDP, and as you know, GDP swang, you said swang, right? Swang, quite, yes, quite a lot over the last decade or so. A lot, really, and therefore we have to be careful about the starting point. That chart, I think, a few years ago, you would have started with 7.5 instead of 5% of GDP for the current spending. But the increase is still about, the projection is an increase of 2 points, a bit more, 2.5 points. And it's much higher than the increase for the EU 22 country. So if you look at this chart, well, I'll come back to it just after in a few minutes. So you see that the countries, based on the current projections, which take into account legislated measures, you see on the right of the chart countries who spend a lot on pensions: Italy, France, Portugal, Spain. Well, it seems like the current projections do not show really big increase. I'll come back to that again in a few seconds. So on average, EU22, if you believe this will be only a small increase, much higher in Ireland, but of course much higher from a much lower initial level, right? That's what is important in this chart. But now, if we look at what happened so here we compare the increase over the last 15-20 years in spending. This is the blue chart with the projection back then in 2000. So here you see that again on the EU on average there was no planned increase in spending, whereas in real life there has been an increase of 1 point in GDP. So from that standpoint, for EU on average, that was too optimistic forecast. And it was too optimistic especially for countries on the right, those who spend a lot. So Spain, Portugal, France, Belgium, Italy, all those countries in terms of actual spending way exceeded the forecast by then. And the reason why on average nothing much, there is less dramatic, is a lot to do with also Central and Eastern European countries. Ireland, from that standpoint, had limited increase, but again, be careful because of the denominator issue I mentioned, the GDP. So if we now look at the 2015-2050 projection, now compared to the same period projection 2015-2050, 15-20 years ago, well, you see, so the blue bar is again, the blue bar, to make it clear, is this increase that we see here. That's the projection now. So that's the blue bar that you see here, what is projected now. And we compare to the projection 15-20 years ago for the same period, 2015-2050. So you see that in the EU on average, there was a projected increase of almost 3 points, right? And now very little. And this change in the projection is explained by all these right-hand side countries, those who spend a lot. So, of course, the question is whether this is the result of pension reforms that took place, or any type of reform, but pension mostly, or whether this is still now, again, optimistic, and too optimistic. And I will not go into this discussion here, but if we look at this, coming from a projection of 3 points to less than 0.3, 0.2, it seems like winter came and flowers are close to blossoming, right? To be blossoming. Soon spring is coming. But of course, you have to believe that past optimism will not be affecting the next future. So you see for Ireland that there has been a revision in the projection from almost 5 points to 2.2. And we can think, of course, of measures like retirement age measures decided in 2010, the public sector reforms in 2013. I've not looked in the details of what was behind, but that's the two main reforms, I think, that come to mind here. And I will try here, just I have one mathematical slide, which is very simple arithmetics. And the counterpart of being simple is that this is exact. This is a mathematical formula, and there is no escape, basically. So you have this expenditures ratio as a ratio of GDP, and you see, if I go to the bottom already, that there are different components. The one is the average benefit ratio. So you see that the average benefit ratio is this P divided by W, so that's average benefit divided by average wage in the economy. So that's one factor. Then you have the OADR, that's old age dependency ratio. This is the 65 plus divided by 2064. That's one ingredient. Then you have on the right SL, which is the labor share in the economy. So WL on the first divided by GDP. So here we don't have projections. I mean, we can make projections, but that's very. So we assume that labor share is basically, well, be constant. So you have old age dependency ratio, average benefit ratio, and then I'll come to the two other parts. But if the old age dependency ratio, as in Ireland, is multiplied by 2.2, and you want to maintain the average benefit ratio, which is already fairly low in international comparison, so certainly you don't want to lower this. Well, as such, this will increase pension expenditures by also multiplied by 2.2 divided by GDP. Unless the other parts come into play, and the other parts are the number of retirees divided by the 65 plus. So of course, for example, retirement age plays a big part in this one. And the other part is 2064 divided by L, which is total employment. And here, retirement age plays a role, of course, but more generally, employment plays a role. Right? It's total employment of the economy. So basically, this is very simple, but old age dependency ratio, if the projections are not too wrong, will be multiplied by 2.2. If you don't want to lower pension benefits in relative terms, you either have to increase or decrease or the number of retirees, or increase L, the number of employment. And so, yes, retirement age is key, and more generally, employment is central. There is no way we can avoid the effective old age dependency ratio, I mean, basically from increasing purely from pension policies. That will not happen. So labor play a key role, and the situation is such that basically if you look at the average employment rate by age group, here you have 55, 59, 60, 64, 65, 69, and the OECD average is those horizontal bars. Basically, Ireland is close to the OECD average, which means a very steep age gradient. Employment falls a lot from 55, 59 to 60, 64 to 65, 69. We have done studies that shows that bad health affect, of course, employment rate, and because health is connected to age, there is clearly an impact of aging in that respect on the health capacity. But there is no way that health alone can explain the extent of the fall of basically 25 points from 70 to 45 between 55, 59 and 60, 64, or between 60, 64 and 65, 69. Health, as we found, it has econometrically, we measured that in another project, it has an impact, but it contributes only a little to this gradient. Health is not, it is a factor, of course, and some people cannot work, nobody denies it. But it only explains a little part of all other things related to, again, pension rules and labor market policies play a big role. Now the good news, of course, is what happened in the last 15, 20 years. And each time, I mean, it's well known on this chart, but each time I look at it, I still find it quite impressive. So over between 2000 and 2016, on average, the employment rate of 55-64 in the OECD increased by almost 15 points. This is quite impressive, especially because we went through this big crisis in the middle. So this happened through the crisis, and you see that for the middle age or 25-54 age group, whether the OECD average or Ireland, there was, you see here basically the impact of the crisis in a way, but despite this 55-64 increased quite a lot, and of course countries on the right hand side, Germany, Hungary, Netherlands, even Italy for that respect, has increased more than 20 points. That's really, truly impressive. And of course, it also highlights that through the crisis, big mistakes of the past, like through promoting early retirement, were avoided. And there was this lump of labor fallacy, not that many people believe in that now. Of course, there could be some short-term effects. If demand is very depressed, like it was through the crisis, if you maintain employment of senior workers, it might affect youth workers in the short term, again, under depressed demand, but this is only a short-term effect. But we tried to estimate what was behind this factor, this big increase. And there are cases, country study, where you can clearly identify measures like pension policies measures, and I think for Ireland we see in the chart that indeed the increase of the retirement age from 65 to 66 something seems to have had a factor, but when we look at econometrics based on all these countries, it's difficult, to be honest, to identify the impact of pension policies. It contributed to 15% of what we see here. The biggest factor where first there is difficult to measure in terms of policies really, but the still convergence of female employment. You see indeed that, so the gender gap, gender gap was reduced, so female employment increased even more. What we found was that the long-term impact of development of education was a factor. Improvement in health was a factor. So we find more impact of education, health, gender convergence than pension policies on this impressive last 15 years. So I go very quickly on these things. So you see here, average OECD, the right-hand side is so that's the change in 1975. Sorry, the bottom chart is labor market exit age, and the top chart are life expectancy. So since 1975, life expectancy at 65 increased by 5 years almost, and labor market exit started to fall. People were exiting the labor market at an earlier age, and then there has been a turnaround 20 years ago on average in the OECD. But you see that the difference between the two, that means that the length of the retirement period has expanded a lot. And this is, we find this type of charts also, that's the retirement age. No, that's not labor market exit age, that's retirement age. We still have this curve, first a fall despite life expectancy gain, and then an increase. Ireland contributed to this because we had the move from 70 to 65, and then it's increasing, that's yes, we have projections now, and so in Ireland it's projected to increase to 68. So I conclude, I have also my conclusion slide. Aging will be starting from some measures. Of course, life expectancy has been increasing for quite some time, but from demographic structure, aging will be starting in Ireland. The old age dependency ratio has been stable since 1950, thanks to high, albeit fast declining fertility rates. But now the pace of aging measured by this indicator will be fast in Ireland. So even if all future gains in life expectancy were passed into increases in retirement ages, this will not be sufficient by far to prevent a substantial increase in effective development ratios as such. So the good news is that Ireland, in terms of spending, is at a current relatively low level compared to OECD countries, both public spending and total pension spending. So there is some fiscal space, but of course there is, that's a political matter of political choice to decide within the nexus of more spending financed by higher contribution rates, lower benefits, longer working lives. I know the roadmap is very important in also promoting the coverage of private pensions now in Ireland. So in any case, increasing retirement age is important, but will only partly address this challenge. This means that labour market policies will be crucial, but it is important really to highlight that in the long term, a range of policies contribute to labour market performance or raising employment beyond only labour market tools, and that includes, as I said, education policies, as well as measures that keep reducing the gender gaps. And Ireland has made progress, but it's still, the gender gap are quite high. And last thing is that improving labour market performance is not only about increasing the quantity of jobs, but also, and especially perhaps among older workers, it is about improving the quality of jobs in terms of working conditions, working hours, flexibility between work and retirement, and so forth. And this might be key to boost labour supply given aging prospects, really, because to motivate people to extend their working lives. So I think I'll stop here.